Part 91. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 902. Tang Huifei hanged herself, Tang brothers died, Duan Wang was deprived of his prince and crown prince titles and imprisoned in the deep palace. His Majesty put aside the government affairs and concentrated on recuperating. All the affairs of the court were decided by the two prime ministers. So many things happened in the capital in a short period of time. Even after a few days, the mood of the people in the capital has not subsided. In half a year, Duan Wang's life can be said to be full of twists and turns. From being abandoned by His Majesty, to being valued again, to being appointed as the crown prince, to being demoted to a commoner and imprisoned in the deep palace, it only took half a year. No one expected that the Tang family and Tang Huifei would be so bold and intend to kill the emperor and rebel. They rose and fell because of this. From then on, there was no Huifei in the palace, and there was only one Tang family in the capital. Counting the past of Prince Duan, after Prime Minister Tang left Beijing, he rose against the trend and dominated the court. Within half a month after Prime Minister Tang returned to Beijing, he went from a prince to a prisoner. If we push the time forward a few years, since the moment the young man named Tang Ning stepped into the capital, the Tang family and Prince Duan, who were once in their heyday, have gradually declined. The Tang family, Prime Minister Feng, Prince Kong, Prince Duan, his former opponents have all returned to dust, but his power has reached the peak. After the Prince Duan's rebellion, the momentum of right Prime Minister Tang Ning has reached a terrifying level. There is no doubt that after His Majesty let go of the government and rested his mind, right Prime Minister Tang Ning has become the real master of the court. In the Yangshen Palace, Tang Ning bowed to Emperor Chen on the bed and said, "I pay my respects to your Majesty." Since the end of the incense for calming the spirit, Emperor Chen's complexion has improved a lot, and the whole person looks more energetic. But Tang Ning knew that his body had actually suffered irreversible damage. In the days ahead, if he ignored state affairs and only focused on health preservation, he might have another 10 years to live. But if he still wanted to be a hard-working emperor, his body would be exhausted within a year. By then, even if elder son came in person, he could not save him. No need for courtesy. Emperor Chen waved his hand at him and said, "Thanks to you for this matter." Tang Ning said, "This is what I should do." Emperor Chen's eyes showed a trace of relief, and he said, "I originally wanted to make Prince Duan the crown prince, but he committed such a heinous crime, so he naturally can no longer bear this important responsibility. I want to pass the throne to Yuan'er in a few years. Yuan'er is honest and kind, and if he is not too young, I will pass the throne to him now." After Prince Duan's failure, Emperor Chen had no choice. Tang Ning was not surprised that he made such a decision. At this time, Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "If it weren't for you this time, I would have gone to see the late emperor. I wanted to reward you, but after thinking about it, I can't think of what to reward you." Tang Ning was the right prime minister in literature and the general in martial arts. His title was also at the top of the powerful. One step further, he would be crowned king. It's a pity that after the establishment of the Chen kingdom, there was an ancestral precept that the opposite sex could not be crowned king. Emperor Chen thought about it for a long time, but he couldn't think of any reward for him. He had no shortage of money, and his official position could not be promoted. Over the years, he had made great contributions one after another, so that he had no more rewards and titles to offer now. Tang Ning cupped his hands and said, "I have a request, please agree to it, Your Majesty." Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "Tell me, as long as I can do it, I will try my best to satisfy you." Tang Ning said, "I beg Your Majesty to allow me to resign and return home. The 3-year period with Li Tianlan has expired." Tang Ning returned to Beijing this time to take Zhao Man away with him. But he didn't expect that the matter in the capital would be settled so quickly. Now that concubine Hui was dead and the Tang family was gone, No one could stop Zhao Yuan from taking that position, and it was time for him to leave. Tang Ning had no interest in government affairs, and even if he was promoted to the position of prime minister or general, it had no appeal to him. Moreover, he had already reached the pinnacle that a minister could achieve. If he continued, he would kick Emperor Chen off that position and take it himself. What? After hearing this, Emperor Chen was stunned for a moment, but his brows were already furrowed. He asked, "You said you want to resign?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "I have been running around for these years, and I am exhausted physically and mentally. I just want to spend the rest of my life with my family. I have no interest in court affairs." "The rest of my life?" Emperor Chen glared at him unhappily and said, "You have just passed the age of 20, and your hair has not grown out yet. What do you mean by the rest of your life?" Tang Ning showed embarrassment on his face and said, "I have grown up. Okay, I know you are working hard. You have been running around for the past few years and have done a lot of things for me. You don't have much time to spend with your family. From now on, I will give you a year off. If 1 year is not enough, I will give you 2 or 3 years. If 3 years are not enough, I will give you 5 years. Emperor Chen glanced at him, waved his hand, and said, "When Yuan comes to power, I will still need you to assist him well." Tang Ning did not insist any more. He knew that Emperor Chen's words were already extremely tolerant of him, even indulgent. But Tang Ning never thought of spending his whole life in Chen state. He had already paid back all he owed Emperor Chen. As for how Chen state would develop in Zhao Yuan's hands in 3 to 5 years, it all depended on his own ability. Anything else? Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, "If it's still about resigning, don't tell me any more." Since Emperor Chen did not agree to resign, Tang Ning stayed in Yangshen Palace for a while and then got up to say goodbye. Chen Huang leaned on the head of the bed, opened his closed eyes, twitched the corners of his mouth, and said, "How can it be so easy to lie to my favorite daughter and run away?" Tang Mansion Villa. A room somewhere in the inner courtyard. Tang Ning held Zhao Man in her arms and told her what had just happened. Zhao Man's face showed a nervous look and she asked, "My father doesn't agree, what should I do?" Although her father had already acquiesced to her and Tang Ning's affairs, she also wanted to be his wife openly and openly like her sisters, instead of being secretive just holding him like she was doing now. Tang Ning held her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry, I have already planned it." Resigning was just a test for Chen Huang. It would be great if he agreed. If he didn't agree, Tang Ning had many backup plans. With his current ability, it is not difficult to take Zhao Man out of the capital secretly. When Zhao Man heard his words, she immediately felt relieved. She put her hands around his neck, raised her head and gently touched Tang Ning's lips, and said with a blushing face, "Thank you for saving my father." "Who made him my father-in-law?" Tang Ning looked at her with a smile on her face and said, "I also want to thank him for giving birth to such a beautiful and lovely daughter." Zhao Man blinked at him with watery eyes. Although her face turned redder, her heart was very happy. Whenever her sweetheart said these words, her heart felt sweet. So she wrapped her arms tighter and raised her head again, but this time it wasn't gentle. "Brother Tang Ning." Fang Xinyu ran in from outside and saw the situation inside the house. She immediately covered her eyes, her big eyes shining between her fingers, and she kept saying, "I didn't see anything." Zhao Man blushed and ran out. Tang Ning stood up, cleared her throat to cover up her embarrassment, and asked, "Why didn't you go find Xiao Xiao?" Thinking of what happened just now, a blush appeared on Fang Xinyu's face and she said, "Dad and Uncle are here, waiting for you outside." After saying that, she ran out quickly. Fang Xinyu and Xiao Xiaoqing are sisters, and Tang Ning has always treated her as a younger sister. She can go in and out of the inner courtyard at will in the Tang family, and is no different from her master. Tang Ning didn't feel anything before, but after today's incident, she felt that if she did anything in the room from now on, she should remember to close the door. He straightened his clothes and walked out of the inner courtyard. Brother Fang Hong was already waiting in the hall. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 903. When the two saw Tang Ning coming in, they stood up at the same time. Fang Hong bowed to him and said, "Meet Prime Minister Tang." Tang Ning smiled and said, "We are all family, no need to be polite, please sit down." If the fourth elder had not smelled the calming incense this time, the situation in the capital would not be like this. The Fang family had already prepared everything and could make Zhao Yu and the crown prince at any time, but they did not expect such a change in the end. Prince Duan's rebellion failed and he was eliminated. The Fang family also cancelled the plan at the last minute. This is a good thing for them. After all, if the Fang family really forced Emperor Chen to abdicate, there would be no good words in the history books. Fang Hong's expression was still a little shocked, and he said, "I can't believe that concubine Hui and the Tang family are so bold." Tang Ning said, "Prince Duan and concubine Tang Hui have brought this upon themselves. Lord Fang, don't worry about the crown prince anymore." Fang Hong sighed and said, "The emperor's heart is hard to predict. It's hard for us, his subjects, to guess what his majesty is thinking. You can rest assured now." Tang Ning looked at the two of them and said, "His majesty has revealed to me today that he will pass the throne to Prince Run in 3 to 5 years. Fang Hong was stunned for a moment, then his face lit up and he asked, "Really?" After he finished speaking, he showed a nervous look on his face again and said, "I don't doubt Prime Minister Tang." Tang Ning waved his hand and said, "This is what His Majesty told me personally." Fang Hong felt relieved, stood up, bowed to Tang Ning, and said, "On behalf of the Fang family and Prince Run, I would like to thank Prime Minister Tang. Although Prince Run's success today is inseparable from the support of the Fang family, Fang Hong knew very well that Tang Ning was the person who played the biggest role in this process." Tang Ning smiled and said, "I just said that we are all family members, Lord Fang, you don't have to be polite." After sitting for a while at the Tang family, the Fang Hong brothers stood up and said goodbye. After getting the confirmed news from Tang Ning, the Fang family finally felt relieved. "You really know how to enjoy life." Not long after the Fang brothers left, Xiaoju walked in from outside, looked at the green courtyard, and asked, "Why don't you live in the city? Why move here?" Tang Ning said, "The scenery here is nice and quiet." Xiaoju took a breath of fresh air and said, "Except that it's a bit far, it's really nice. I plan to bring my father and Yatter over. There is a large piece of vacant land next to your house. Do you mind if I build a few houses there?" Tang Ning moved his family out of Beijing to make it easier to escape, but he didn't know why Xiaoju joined in the fun. Since Tang Ning told him the secret of Empress Xiao's death, Xiaoju has become different. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Are you okay?" "What can happen to me?" Xiaoju grinned and said, "The Tang brothers are dead, concubine Tang Hui is also dead, my sister's revenge is avenged, I am happy." He sat beside Tang Ning, took a sip of tea, and said to himself, "Is the poison of His Majesty cured?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "The poison is not easy to cure. Even if you can save your life, you will lose your lifespan." Xiaoju asked, "How long can he live?" Tang Ning said, "If you take good care of yourself, it's possible to live for 10 or 8 years. Xiaoju raised his eyebrows and asked, "So long?" Tang Ning's eyes fell on him again and said, "Don't do stupid things." Although the Tang Hui brothers are dead and concubine Tang Hui also hanged herself, there is another culprit for the death of Empress Xiao and concubine Yang, a culprit that Xiaoju cannot avenge. Xiaoju looked at him, smiled, and asked, "What if it was you?" Tang Ning was speechless for a moment. If it was him, the culprit who killed his relatives, no matter who he was, no matter what his status was, he would have the same fate as concubine Tang Hui. even if he was the emperor. Without waiting for Tang Ning to answer, Xiaoju laughed and said, I don't have your ability. The Xiao family is a small family and can't stand the tossing. I also want to pass my title to my son. Tang Ning looked at him and said seriously, if you have any ideas, you must tell me. I will always stand by your side. This is what Xiaoju once said to Tang Ning, and Tang Ning returned it to him intact at this moment. Xiaoju smiled and said, what if I want to rebel? At worst, we can do it together. Tang Ning smiled and said, haven't you wanted to rebel with me for a long time? You don't want your life, but I do. Let's go. Xiaoju's eyes flashed, and suddenly he punched Tang Ning's shoulder lightly, saying, remember to keep the land next to it. Tang Ning watched Xiaoju's back go away. Zhao Man walked out of the room and asked, what did you say just now? Tang Ning retracted her gaze and smiled. He said he wanted to build a house next to our house. Zhao Man said happily, if I become a neighbor with Sister Lu, won't I be able to hug Xiao Yuer often? Xiao Yuer is Xiaoju's son. Lu Ya and Xiaoju are handsome, so their son will naturally be good looking. He looks like a porcelain doll. Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi are at the age when their maternal instincts are overflowing. Every time Lu Ya brings a child to the Tang mansion, they will fight for it. Tang Ning looked at Zhao Man and asked, do you like children so much? Zhao Man nodded and said, he is chubby and I like to pinch his face the most. Tang Ning leaned close to her ear and whispered something. Zhao Man's face turned pink and she looked up and said, 2. Outside the Tang mansion's courtyard, a carriage started slowly. The child in Lu Ya's arms had fallen asleep. She shook her arms gently, looked at Xiaoju, and whispered, you want to build a house here? Xiaoju nodded and said, it's not bad to be a neighbor with that guy. Lu Ya shook her head and said, then your wish will come true. Sister Zhong said that her family will go on a trip soon and won't return to Beijing for a long time. Xiaoju curled his lips and said, His Majesty is seriously ill. How can he, a prime minister, leave the capital? Do you think it's you? Lu Ya rolled her eyes at him and said, he is your Majesty's favorite. Your Majesty treats him better than his own son. I heard that he was given several years of leave this time. How can you compare with him? After saying that, she felt that this seemed to be a bit of a blow to Xiaoju, and added, of course, His Majesty is also good to you. Among the 16 guards, except Lord Tang, there is no general younger than you. Xiaoju twitched his lips and laughed at himself, isn't it good? Of course it's true. Apart from him, His Majesty's favorite is you. Lu Ya said, General of the 16th Guards, which one is not more than 20 years older than the two of you? Let's not talk about this anymore. Xiaoju shook his head and said, why don't you go out with them to play? Okay. Lu Ya said with an excited expression on her face, I have already wanted to go to Beijing for some fun, but you are General Ximen Guard, can you get away? Xiaoju shook his head and said, I won't go. The Ximen Guards are busy with affairs and I can't leave. Lu Ya glared at him and said, if you don't go, they are having fun as a family, and I will join in the fun. Xiaoju's eyes wandered and he didn't speak again. The carriage entered the city gate and stopped in front of the Xiao mansion. Lu Ya got off the carriage, looked back at Xiaoju and said angrily, what are you still doing sitting up there? Come down. Xiaoju smiled and said, you go back first, I will buy the candied fruits you like to eat. Just let the servants do these things. Lu Ya glanced at him, but did not refuse. She felt sweet in her heart and said softly, come back soon. Xiaoju nodded. Seeing Lu Ya walk into the mansion, the smile on his face gradually faded. He looked at the coachman and said, go to Prince Huai's mansion. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 904. Prince Huai's Mansion. A luxurious carriage stopped at the gate of the palace. The porter saw the word Xiao with gold edges on the curtain of the carriage. His expression became serious, and he immediately stepped forward and said respectfully to the young man who got off the carriage, "I've seen you before, General Xiao." Xiaoju looked at him and asked, "Is your highness here?" The concierge nodded and said, "General Xiao, please wait here for a moment, and I will report it right away." Xiaoju waved his hand and said, "No, I'll go in and find him myself." As he strode towards the palace, the porter immediately stopped him and said, "General Xiao, this is a rule set by His Highness. No matter who comes, they must be informed first." Xiaoju's face darkened, he looked into Prince Huai's palace and said coldly, "Zhao Rui, come out and see me." He spoke angrily, and in an instant, there seemed to be a thunderous explosion in Prince Huai's palace. In the pavilion by the lake, King Huai was playing chess with someone. Suddenly he raised his head, put down the white chess in his hand, and said, "I'll excuse you for a while." King Fu rubbed his fat belly and said, "Go." King Huai walked out of the pavilion, walked a few steps, then turned back and said, "Don't touch my chess piece." King Fu snorted coldly and said, "Ha ha, you have to cheat when playing chess with a junior. Do you think your Uncle Wang is shameless?" After King Huai left, King Fu looked around, moved the black chess on the chessboard a few squares, shook his head and said, "If you don't move yours, move my own head office, right?" King Huai left the pavilion by the lake and walked outside the palace gate. Looking at Xiaoju standing next to the carriage, a trace of doubt appeared on his face. He stepped forward and asked, "General Xiao is here?" "Why, expensive?" "Don't worry, I'm not here to fight with you," Xiaoju said coldly and walked into the palace with a stern face. King Huai was stunned, and then a smile appeared on his face. Xiaoju and he both lost their mothers in their early years. At that time, he was raised by Queen Xiao, and Xiaoju often went to the palace to play. The two of them often fought, and they often joined forces to beat the princes and dignitaries who bullied them to pieces. One is Empress Xiao's younger brother, and the other is Empress Xiao's adopted son. The two are similar in age. They fight each other, but when they encounter foreign enemies, they will stand on the same front without hesitation. Later, Empress Xiao passed away, Xiaoju never entered the palace again, and the two rarely met. Xiaoju's words just now brought back some memories deep in King Huai's heart. After he came to his senses, he saw the concierge looking helplessly at Xiaoju who walked in. He waved to him and said, "Here, don't worry about it, just go and do your work." In Prince Huai's palace, Xiaoju sat on the guest seat, looked at Prince Huai, and said, "We haven't sat face to face and talked like this for a long time." King Huai personally poured tea for him and said, "It's been more than 10 years. Xiaoju said, 19 years. Prince Huai sat opposite Xiaoju and changed the subject, "Why are you free to come to the palace today and don't have to accompany your wife?" Xiaoju did not continue his topic, but looked at King Huai and said, "It has been 22 years since concubine Yang passed away, and it has been 19 years since concubine Yang passed away." King Huai's fingers trembled when he picked up the teacup, and some tea spilled on the table. He calmly took a sip of tea and said, "Speaking of which, the Queen's death anniversary is coming soon. I plan to pay homage at her tomb in a few days. Will General Xiao go with me?" Xiaoju showed a self-deprecating smile on his face and said, "Are we worthy?" King Huai's expression changed slightly and he asked, "What do you mean, General Xiao?" Xiaoju took a deep breath, looked at him, and asked, "After all these years, haven't you noticed at all that the deaths of concubine Yang and her sister are strange?" King Huai put down his teacup and said, "The imperial hospital has long concluded that both the concubine and the empress died of illness." "What's so strange?" Haven't we seen it with our own eyes? Xiaoju looked at him and gritted his teeth. Do you really believe their lies? King Huai frowned and said, what on earth do you mean? A trace of bloodshot eyes appeared in Xiaoju's eyes, and he said, it was the Tang family, it was the Tang family and concubine Tang Hui who killed concubine Yang and the empress. A look of disbelief appeared on King Huai's face. He stood up suddenly, looked at Xiaoju, and said sternly, what did you say? Concubine Tang Hui wanted to become the master of the harem, but concubine Yang and the empress were both obstacles in her way. Xiaoju closed his eyes, slowly opened them, and said, so she killed concubine Yang and the empress. Tang family, concubine Tang Hui. King Huai clenched his teeth. After a moment, he breathed a long sigh of relief, sat down slowly, and said, the brothers of the Tang family and concubine Tang Hui died unjustly, which can be considered as revenge for the mother and concubine. Xiaoju looked up at him and asked, do you really think that the revenge of concubine Yang and the empress has been avenged? King Huai looked at him and said, brother Tang Hui has already died, and concubine Tang Hui hanged herself with my own eyes. Don't you want to exhume them and whip their corpses? Although they are dead, the culprit of this matter is still alive and well. Xiaoju stared into King Huai's eyes and asked, do you think that with the help of the Tang family and concubine Hui, you can kill concubine Yang? And the queen? King Huai finally realized something, looked at Xiaoju indifferently, and said, General Xiao, be careful what you say. Xiaoju slammed the table, grabbed Prince Huai's collar, and gritted his teeth, you know exactly what is going on. King Huai shook his head and said, I don't know. Asshole, Xiaoju responded with an angry punch. King Huai stepped back a few steps, wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, looked at Xiaoju, and said, for the sake of the queen, I will pretend that I didn't hear what you said just now. Xiaoju spit and punched again. How dare you? King Huai's face showed a trace of gloom. He grabbed Xiaoju's wrist with one hand and punched him in the face with the other hand. Xiaoju did not dodge or evade. The remaining hand punched King Huai's chest. Bang! Bang! A dark blue appeared on Xiaoju's face. King Huai stepped back a few steps, covering his chest, and a trace of abnormal blood appeared on his face. When the servants of the palace heard the noise and rushed over, Xiaoju and Prince Huai were already injured. Several servants' faces changed. Looking at the two people fighting each other, they hurriedly said, General Xiao, Your Highness, stop fighting, stop fighting. Xiaoju kicked one person and said angrily, get out. Prince Huai's face was gloomy, and he said, I will teach this person a lesson today, and none of you should interfere. The servants of Prince Huai's palace stood in place, neither advancing nor retreating. General Xiao is not only the general of the West Gate Guard, but also the uncle of the king. His Highness Prince Huai has to call him uncle, and His Highness has always been gentle and elegant. How could the servants of the palace see him like this? How could they interfere in the fight between these two people? Seeing the two of them punching and kicking each other like gangsters, the servants in the palace were as anxious as ants on a hot pot. A clever one finally came to his senses and immediately said, quick, go and ask the princess to come over. Bang! Xiaoju's last punch hit King Huai's shoulder, and King Huai hit Xiaoju's chest with a palm. The two of them took a few steps back at the same time, standing a few steps away, panting and glaring at each other. After a while, the anger on Xiaoju's face gradually dissipated. He looked at King Huai with extremely disappointed eyes and whispered, Mr. Zhao, you and I, from today on, we will end our friendship. King Huai's face was gloomy and asked, what is the favor between you and me? Xiaoju took a last look at him and turned away without looking back. He no longer looked at the gloomy expression on King Huai's face, so naturally he could not see the deep sadness in King Huai's eyes when he watched him go away. Prince Huai's Palace. When the Princess of Hawaii heard the news that the Prince of Hawaii and the General of the West Gate Guard Xiaoju had fought, she immediately rushed over here. She saw Xiaoju coming out of the hall with a bruised face from a distance. She couldn't help but quicken her pace, shook off the maids behind her, and hurried past Xiaoju and ran into the hall. Several maids hurriedly chased after him and passed by Xiaoju. "Stop!" Xiaoju, who had already walked a few steps, suddenly stopped, turned around abruptly, looked at a maid of the Prince of Hawaii's mansion, and shouted, "Turn around!" Lewin Mobile Version Website. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 905. On the corridor, when the maid heard Xiaoju's voice, she not only did not look back, but her steps became faster and her head lowered. "Stop!" Xiaoju drank again, and the maid trembled, finally stopped, and said in a trembling voice, "Xiao, General Xiao, what do you want?" Xiaoju walked up to her and looked directly at her face with two sharp eyes. The maid lowered her head, staring at her toes, and sweat began to appear on her forehead. The rest of the maids also looked strange, secretly wondering if General Xiao had fallen in love with Zhu'er. If that was the case, he would probably be disappointed, because although Zhu'er had just arrived in the palace not long ago, he was deeply liked by His Highness and the princess. It was impossible to give her away. "It's okay." Xiaoju's eyes stayed on her for a long time, then he suddenly laughed, waved his hand and said, "I recognized the wrong person, you go ahead." The maid bowed to him in a panic and walked forward quickly. In the hall, Princess Hawaii wiped the blood from the corners of King Hawaii's mouth distressedly and complained, "How could your highness fight with General Xiao?" "It's okay." King Hawaii took the handkerchief from her hand and said with a smile, "You don't know, we were beaten even more severely when we were children. If the Empress hadn't stopped us, we would have had several fights every day." "The past was before, and now is now." Princess Hawaii said angrily, "You two are so old, how come you are still like children?" She glared at King Hawaii and said, "I'll get you some medicine." After Princess Hawaii walked out of the room, the maid walked in, looked at Prince Hawaii, and said with a pale face, "Your Highness, General Xiao seems to recognize me." King Hawaii smiled at her and said, "It's okay. You can go back to your room first. I will handle this matter." The maid nodded and slowly withdrew. "You are still too soft-hearted. If Zizu dies, she will be your eternal leverage. If she is exposed, you may lose all your previous efforts at any time. In this way, all your arrangements over the past 10 years will be in vain." An old voice came from behind the screen. King Hawaii glanced at the figure behind the screen and said, "It is not your turn to teach me what I am doing. Don't forget, if all your efforts are wasted, all the efforts I have made on you over the years will be in vain." The voice said with a hint of murderous intent, "Since the person named Xiao has figured out her identity, why not let him always shut up to avoid future troubles?" King Hawaii looked in the direction of the screen, his voice extremely cold, "If you touch a hair on his face, I will let your whole family be buried with him." The figure was silent for a long time, and his tone finally softened, "You know the importance. You should handle this matter yourself." Princess White walked in from outside, and there was no sound from behind the screen. King Hawaii put medicine on his face before walking back to the pavilion by the lake. King Fu looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you tell him?" King Hawaii said, "The Xiao family is very small. If the queen were still alive, we would not be willing to let him take such a big risk." King Fu sighed and said, "Just like this, I will suffer a lot for you. Just get used to it." King Hawaii smiled nonchalantly, picked up the chess pieces again, looked at the chessboard, his expression changed slightly, and asked, "Did you move my chess piece?" "Who do you think your Uncle Wang is?" Prince Fu snorted coldly and said, "If I play your chess piece, Anyang will never be able to marry for the rest of his life." Half an hour later, when Tang Ning saw Xiaoju again, she stood up from her chair in shock. He looked at Xiaoju, who had a bruised nose and swollen face and was walking with a limp, and was shocked. "What's wrong with you?" "It's okay." Xiaoju waved his hand and said, "I accidentally fell." If he wanted to fall like this, he would probably have to roll down the western mountain. Tang Ning looked at him and asked suspiciously. Lu Yazi discovered that he was raising a woman outside. Although Lu Ya was never polite to Xiaoju, she would never beat him up like this. Apart from the fact that Xiaoju was raising a woman outside and she discovered it, Tang Ning couldn't think of a second reason. To say that someone else had done it, there were not many people in the capital who dared to fight General Ximen Wei. It's King Huai. Xiaoju knew that he couldn't hide it from Tang Ning, so he said, "But he's not much better than me." Tang Ning was shocked that Xiaoju actually took action against King Huai. What was even more shocking was the second half of his sentence. No one knew better than him how much Xiaoju weighed. Even though King Huai had given him 2 hands, he could still beat him like this. How could he be even more embarrassed than Xiaoju? However, it was possible that King Huai was hiding something secret. Compared to this, Tang Ning was more curious about the reason why he and King Huai started fighting. She looked at him and asked, "Why did you start fighting with King Huai?" Xiaoju said, "I said he couldn't give birth to a son, and then he started fighting with me." Since having his son, Xiaoju has become more and more unscrupulous in his speech, especially when facing Tang Ning and King Huai. Even if he doesn't speak, his mysterious confidence is clearly revealed. If so, there is nothing pitiful about him being beaten like this. Xiaoju waved his hand and said, "Let's not talk about this anymore. I have something to ask you." Tang Ning asked, "What's the matter?" Xiaoju looked at him and asked, "How did the Tang family and concubine Tang Hui poison His Majesty?" Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Why do you ask?" Xiaoju said, "They are the murderers who killed my sister. I want to know how they committed suicide, can't I?" "This reason is sufficient." Tang Ning nodded and said, "The Tang family got a strange poison and secretly sent it to the palace. Concubine Tang Hui arranged for the maid who lit incense for His Majesty to put it in the sandalwood that His Majesty used every day. After a while, His Majesty was poisoned." Xiaoju showed a look of surprise on his face and asked, "Which maid is so bold that she dared to poison His Majesty?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "It seems to be Zizou." Xiaoju murmured, "It's her." Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Do you know her?" Xiaoju nodded and said, "She used to be a maid next to my sister. I have some impression of her." "What a pity." Tang Ning said, "His Majesty originally ordered her to be executed by slow slicing, but she committed suicide in the Dali temple." "It's better if she committed suicide." Xiaoju shook his head and said, "Save her from the pain of slow slicing." Tang Ning did not continue the topic. Looking at the bruises on his face, he said, "I have some medicine at home, which was prepared by Old Sunday. It has a miraculous effect on this kind of bruise. Do you want me to give you some?" Xiaoju sighed, "You are still the best. You are also a person who can't give birth to a son, but you are much better than that bastard King Huai." After he said that, he looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Where is the medicine?" Tang Ning's face sank and he said in a gloomy voice, "Get lost." Tang Ning moved here from the capital, and the number of visitors was not less than before, but more. As soon as Xiaoju left, Princess Anyang came in from outside, looked back in surprise, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "What happened to his face?" Tang Ning said, "He was beaten." Princess Anyang was shocked and said, "Who has such courage?" "Prince Huai." "How is it possible?" Princess Anyang said with a look of disbelief. "Prince Huai and him are like brothers, how could he fight with him?" Tang Ning looked at Princess Anyang and said in surprise, "Prince Huai and him, like brothers." Princess Anyang said, "After concubine Yang passed away, Prince Huai has been raised by the Queen Mother. At that time, General Xiao was fighting outside, and Xiaoju also stayed in the palace to be taken care of by the Queen Mother. They slept in the same bed when they were young. It was the first time Tang Ning heard about this, surprised, is there such a thing? Princess Anyang nodded and said, however, this happened a long time ago. After the queen passed away, General Xiao returned to Beijing and took Xiao Ju out of the palace. Later, they probably didn't see each other often. After she finished speaking, she looked at Tang Ning in confusion and asked, why did he fight with Prince Huai? Tang Ning said, he laughed at Prince Huai for not being able to have children. As a man, who can tolerate this? Speaking of this, Princess Anyang also showed a puzzled look on her face and asked, Princess Huai looks much more fertile than Lu Yat. Why do you think Xiaoju has children, but Prince Huai doesn't? Due to the lack of scientific knowledge, people in this world generally believe that being unable to have children is a woman's fault. When men marry, they also tend to marry those who are easy to give birth to. As for how they judge whether they are easy to give birth, there has been a set of standards for thousands of years. Tang Ning has seen Princess Huai and Lu Yat. According to this standard, Princess Huai is indeed more suitable. But in fact, no matter whether it is Lu Yat or Princess Huai, they are not as good as Princess Anyang in this respect. Tang Ning subconsciously glanced at Princess Anyang, but unexpectedly, the woman was very sensitive to certain parts of her body. Princess Anyang actually caught his gaze and took 2 steps back. She looked at Tang Ning in shame and anger and said angrily, where are you looking at? Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 906. When Princess Anyang raised the question of having a child, Tang Ning just glanced at that part of her body. She didn't expect her to have such an exaggerated reaction. Tang Ning's face turned dark as she looked at Princess Anyang, who took a few steps back, guarding her hands, and looking at him with a wary expression. Was she worried that he would execute her on the spot here? This was the Tang mansion, and several ladies were in the inner courtyard. Even if they really wanted to rectify her on the spot, they couldn't choose this place. Tang Ning looked away, ignoring her rude words just now, and explained to her, whether you can have children or not has something to do with both husband and wife. It may be a woman's problem, or it may be a man's problem. Generally speaking, in other words, the latter may be larger. Until she sat down opposite Tang Ning, the strange feeling in a certain part of Anyang County's main body had not subsided. She glared at Tang Ning and temporarily ignored what had just happened and asked, you mean, it has been so long since Prince Huai was married, it's his own problem that he doesn't have children yet? That's not necessarily true. Tang Ning shook her head and said, King Huai only has one princess. If he has several concubines, and these concubines have no heirs, then it is most likely his problem. Princess Anyang heard this, thought about it, looked at him with a hint of pity, and asked, so, you have 4 ladies in your family and still have no children, so it must be your problem. Well, I actually doubt it. Tang Ning looked at her, looking her up and down, and said, so I plan to marry the 5th wife who seems to be able to have children, and try again. If the 5th wife can't do it either, fertility is really my problem. The princess has friends all over the world. Do you have any suitable recommendations? Looking at Tang Ning's hot eyes, Princess Anyang's heart skipped a beat. He said he was recommending a friend, but his eyes kept looking at her, and it was clear that he had his sights set on her. Don't even think about it. She stood up in a panic and hurried outside. She was so embarrassed and annoyed that she even forgot about the serious business of coming to Tang Ning today. Seeing Princess Anyang running away, Tang Ning stood up with satisfaction. As far as her skills were concerned, if she wanted to take advantage of him verbally, she might as well practice for a few more years. How come we don't know that you are planning to marry the 5th lady recently? A voice coming from behind made Tang Ning's heart tighten. She slowly turned around and saw Tang Yao Yao and Su Mei standing not far away with their arms around each other, looking at him. What I mean is. A smile appeared on Tang Ning's face, and she hurriedly stepped forward and said, "The matter in the capital is almost done. It's time for us to leave. I was about to discuss with you that after we leave the capital, we will go. Where is it?" Su Mei rolled her eyes at him and said, "Of course I'm going to Guizhou. When Tang Ning went to Guizhou last time, she planned to let Xiru and the others go to Chu State first. At that time, she didn't think much about it. The more she thought about it, the more she felt something was wrong. Although Chu State was good, it was not her territory after all. Even if they went to Chu State, isn't the country still dependent on others? Although the grassland was Wanyanyan's territory, the two of them had not yet met each other, so it was a bit inappropriate for the family to move to the grassland like this. Only the Guizhou region is completely their back garden. The Gu tribe's worship and obedience to the saint of Wangu sect has been engraved in their bones for thousands of years and will not change easily. Tang Ning said, "Then let's get ready and leave as soon as possible." Tang Yao Yao obviously didn't want Tang Ning to get away with it so easily. She stepped forward with her hands on her hips and said, "What I just heard seems to be about marrying the fifth lady and having children. When it comes to having children, why do we need the fifth lady?" Tang Ning held her hand and said, "Now that the matter of Chengguo has been settled, we really need to think about it carefully. Otherwise, we will have a baby when we get to Guizhou." Although they have done everything they should do as a couple, when it comes to giving birth to a child, a trace of panic still flashes across Tang Yao Yao's face, and she hurriedly said, "I'm not in a hurry to give birth to you and them, I'm not in a hurry." Tang Yao Yao's mother died due to dystocia. Unlike Xiao Ru Xiaoi, she was born with a fear of this matter. There is still a long way to go before she can get through this crisis in her heart safely. Although he has decided to leave, Tang Ning still has a lot of things to arrange before leaving. Regarding the store in the capital, he and Princess Anyang still have some things to explain. Sooner or later, he will have to talk to her. Tang Ning regrets scaring her just now. And fled. To Tang Ning's expectation, Princess Anyang appeared in front of him again an hour later, but this time, she was accompanied by Zhao Man. Princess Anyang glared at Tang Ning and said, "I have found the fifth madam for you. If you want to have a child, you can go and have it yourself." As if she was sure that Zhao Man was here, Tang Ning did not dare to tease her anymore. Princess Anyang sat across from him generously and asked, "I will withdraw my people from your store in the capital as soon as possible. Please arrange for someone to take over again soon." Tang Ning looked at her and asked in surprise, "Why? Do you still need to ask?" Princess Anyang glanced at him and said, "When you were leaving the capital, you were worried that someone would attack these shops, so you asked me to help take care of them. Now that you are back, even King Duan has been defeated. Now that it's in your hands, whoever dares to attack your shop won't need me anymore." Although these shops can bring her huge profits in her hands, she is not someone who will take advantage of others in vain. In the past, Tang Ning relied on her reputation to intimidate the powerful in the capital. He has climbed to the top, and even the prince fell into his hands. Who else dares to touch his bad luck? In this case, of course she is no longer needed. Tang Ning glanced at Princess Anyang and asked, "Do I seem to be such a person who always gives up?" When he handed over the store to Princess Anyang, he had considered it in the future. After all, he left the capital this time and might rarely come back. If the Tang family's business in the capital could not find a suitable person to entrust it to him, it might as well be withdraw from the capital to avoid being annexed. Princess Anyang's face turned red when she heard this, and she secretly spat, "Bah, what started with chaos and ended up giving up." Tang Ning looked at her and explained, "What I mean is that these shops are still managed by the princess. If you feel that the remuneration is too little, I will give you an additional 10% of the profit." What does the princess think? In the 6 months since Tang Ning left the capital, Princess Anyang has been taking care of the shops in the capital. No one knows better than her how profitable their shops are in the capital. This 10% profit can be converted into hundreds of thousands of taels of silver every year. Tang Ning gave her 20% of the store's profits half a year ago. With this 10%, it would be a full 30%. This was a figure that she couldn't refuse. Seeing that Princess Anyang was silent, Tang Ning thought it was too little. After thinking about it, she added, "If you think it's not enough, then add another 20%. He originally planned to give up the business in the capital. As long as someone was willing to take care of it, he would make money no matter what, but even so, 50% was the limit he could give. This is because Princess Anyang is Zhao Man's sister, Tang Shui's best friend, and has helped Tang Ning many times. If it were anyone else, he would rather give up the money and not make it than let others take advantage of him." Princess Anyang looked at Tang Ning blankly and asked in disbelief, "Are you willing to give me 50% of your profits for free?" Tang Ning glanced at her and said, "Don't be dissatisfied, 50% is already a lot." Princess Anyang certainly knows that 50% is a lot, but the problem is that she only spent some manpower, but she can get 50% of the profits from the Tang family's property in Beijing, which was given to her for nothing. Over the years she has been in the capital, she has dealt with all kinds of people. Normally, gifts given to her by others were counted in horse-drawn carriages, but she had never been as generous as Tang Ning, who gave them millions of taels of silver. You know, a few years ago, the tax deducted by the national treasury every year was less than 10 million taels. Showing courtesy for nothing is nothing but stealing. He had wanted something from her before and was willing to let her take advantage, which was reasonable. But now, he clearly doesn't need her anymore, but he still wants to give her half of the Tang family's property. Princess Anyang didn't believe that someone could be so generous. At this moment, she thought of many things in her mind. Most of them were the speculations she and Zhao had made in the past. She also thought of the way Tang Ning looked at her just now, and thought of the similar situation between him and King Huai. A possibility immediately emerged in his mind, his face gradually darkened, and he said angrily, "Am I this kind of person in your eyes?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 907. Seeing Princess Anyang questioning herself with a serious face, Tang Ning couldn't help but respect her. Princess Anyang has always been a money lover in Tang Ning's eyes. Tang Ning thought she would agree without hesitation to give her such a big deal. I didn't expect her to react so strongly to this, and she obviously didn't want to accept this ill-gotten gain. I was rude. Tang Ning realized that he still didn't understand Princess Anyang, so she hugged her fist apologetically and said, "In this case, I will sell these shops as soon as possible, so that I won't trouble Princess Anyang in the future." Princess Anyang thought that Tang Ning had some intention in giving her this big gift. After hearing this, she looked at him blankly and murmured, "Sell, sell." Tang Ning nodded and said, "To be honest, Manur and I will leave the capital soon. Once we leave this time, we will rarely come back again. The Tang family's shop is in the capital. If you don't have the background, you won't be able to leave the capital in a few years, it will be annexed by others, so it is better to sell it as soon as possible." "Wait." Princess Anyang looked at him, then at Zhao Man, and asked, "You want to leave?" The matter between him and Zhao Man was originally caused by Princess Anyang, so there was no need for Tang Ning to hide it from her. She explained, "Concubine Tang Hui is dead, and the brothers of the Tang family have also been executed. My great revenge has been avenged, and I will stay in the capital. As the right prime minister, I can never be with Manur, so I plan to take her far away, away from the capital, and away from Chen country." "You want to elope?" Princess Anyang stared at him in disbelief and asked, "If you don't want to be the prime minister, you won't be the general, and you don't want the title of Marquis of Dingguo. If you sell the shops in the capital, just to elope with manner? Tang Ning smiled slightly and said, fame and wealth are like clouds to me. No matter whether I am prime minister or general, they are not as important as being with the one I love. Zhao Man's face turned red and she took the initiative to hold Tang Ning's arm with a happy look on her face. Princess Anyang looked at him, although her expression was shocked, there was a glint of light in her eyes. How many people have longed for power all their lives but cannot get it? At such a young age, he has already achieved what ordinary people cannot achieve in several lifetimes, but he is willing to give up everything for a woman. How courageous is this? How happy is the woman he likes? Thinking of this, Princess Anyang's face turned red, and she felt an inexplicable sweetness in her heart. However, she soon realized something, looked at Tang Ning suddenly, and asked, you asked me to help you take care of the Tang family's business, give me 50% of the profit, is this the reason? What else could it be because of? Tang Ning glanced at her and asked, the princess doesn't think I have any plans for you, right? Princess Anyang's face turned red, half ashamed and half angry. She was ashamed that her noble princess would actually make a mistake on such a matter. She was angry that he didn't explain such a big matter clearly, causing her to think about it for so long. At this moment, she wanted to sew it up in an orderly manner. Get in there. Tang Ning looked at her with some regret and said, the princess is Manner's sister and a friend of Shui'er. She can be considered a member of the family. I originally wanted to entrust you to take care of these businesses, but I didn't expect the princess to be like this. I am a person of high integrity and do not want to take advantage of the Tang family. In this case, I will sell these shops and save a lot of trouble. Princess Anyang asked, just because of this? Tang Ning asked, what else? Before Princess Anyang could answer, he continued, the princess's people can withdraw first. I think as long as the news is released, many businessmen in Beijing will be happy to take over these shops. Princess Anyang finally came to her senses and said hurriedly, I am willing, who says I am not willing? This was basically a business that was sure to make a profit. Apart from helping him take care of the shop, how could she make millions of taels of silver every year? Tang Ning was surprised, didn't the princess just say? At this moment, as long as Tang Ning had not set her sights, how could she refuse the free money? Princess Anyang waved her hand and said, it was just now, but now I have changed my mind. It's no wonder that women are so cruel. Just now, she scolded Tang Ning with a sullen face, as if her character had been insulted, but now she was eager to agree. If she did this every time in the future, Tang Ning would also feel a headache and trouble. He shook his head and said, I'm sorry, princess, I've also changed my mind. I still think it's better to sell the shop. Short-sighted, Princess Anyang frowned and said, our stores in the capital alone generate hundreds of millions of taels of revenue every year. Selling these stores can make a short-term profit, but in the long run, the loss is more than 10 times 100 times. It's not us, it's me. Tang Ning corrected the mistake in her words before saying, to be honest with the princess, the Tang family is not short of money, and they don't care about this little money. Princess Anyang wanted to say that he didn't care about his wealth, but she did. With this 50% profit, she would have enough food and clothing in the future. If she refused now, she would be refusing hundreds of millions of taels of silver. You can't be so prodigal even if you don't lack money. Princess Anyang glanced at Zhao Man and said, you will have to raise manner in the future. She is a princess and she has the best food and clothing. Without these shops, how can you afford to support her? Zhao Man looked at her and said, as long as I can be with him, I am willing to eat bran-thick vegetables. Princess Anyang said with a dark face, Manner, please go back to your room first. I have something to discuss with Prime Minister Tang. Zhao Man looked at Tang Ning and said, then I'll wait for you in the room. Watching her walk away in small steps, Tang Ning looked at Princess Anyang again and asked, "Princess, what do you want to discuss with me?" "No one can get a bargain, but those merchants can," Princess Anyang said. "I will manage the Tang family's shop as before." Tang Ning said, "I have made up my mind, Princess, you don't need to say anything more." He didn't react just now. If he still doesn't know what Princess Anyang meant just now, he would be too slow. However, although she has the capital to think so, she underestimates herself. Tang Ning wants to cooperate with her for win-win cooperation, not to take advantage of her childbearing. Since she thinks so, it's better to sell the shop directly. Princess Anyang glared at her, gritting her teeth. She knew that her reaction just now might have angered this guy, but now that things had come to this, she didn't want to back down. She simply gritted her teeth and said, "If you don't agree, I'll tell your wife that you peeked at me." Tang Ning's face changed and he said, "Don't say that." Princess Anyang looked at him with a sharp gaze and said, "Do you dare to say you didn't see it?" She was obviously risking her life for the money. Tang Ning waved his hand and said, okay, just as you said just now, the business in Beijing will continue to be managed by the princess." Princess Anyang showed a smug look on her face and asked, "Then the annual profit?" Tang Ning asked, "Hasn't it always been 20%? Princess Anyang's face changed and she said, "Didn't you say 50% just now?" Tang Ning looked puzzled, "Did I say that?" Princess Anyang stared at him in astonishment. After a moment, she gritted her teeth and said, "Mr. Tang, you are so cruel." When Princess Anyang left Tang's house in shame and anger, Lu Ya was applying medicine to Xiaoju in Xiao's house, and said distressedly, "This Prince Huai was so cruel. Don't let me meet him next time." Xiaoju waved his hand and said, "Forget it, he didn't get any benefits anyway." Lu Ya glared at him and said, "You are the same. You are so careless. Why do you expose other people's scars for no reason?" Lu Ya was muttering in the room. A maid came in from outside and said, "Son-in-law, Prince Huai is here." Xiaoju's eyes flashed with a strange color. He stood up and said, "Tell him to wait for me in the study." When Prince Huai was led by a maid into the study of Xiao's house, Lu Ya glared at him fiercely and pinched his knuckles. King Huai walked into the study, Xiaoju walked back to the door, looked at Lu Ya, and said, "You go back to your room and rest first, I'll be there in a while." After Lu Ya left, Xiaoju closed the door, and only he and King Huai were left in the study. Xiaoju looked at him and said straight to the point, "Did King Kong rebel? Did you do it too?" He used the word also in this sentence. King Huai did not deny it, looked at Xiaoju, and said, "Don't bother with this matter anymore." Xiaoju laughed twice, walked over, punched him hard on the shoulder, and said, "You are still the same as when you were a child. You can't beat Zhao Ming and Zhao Cheng, so you drag me to use those insidious tricks. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 908. In Xiao Mansion, in the study, Xiaoju looked at King Huai and said, "It turns out that the former right-wing Ximen Guard General Qiyu is your man. Where is he now?" The former right-wing General Ximen Wei rebelled with King Kong. Unfortunately, he did not show up on the day of the rebellion, and was missing after that. His arrest documents were posted in various state capitals, but the court has not found any trace of him until now. King Huai said, "He is no longer in Chen country." Xiaoju continued, "Did you give the Tang family that strange poison?" King Huai neither admitted nor denied it. Xiaoju looked directly at him and asked, "What should we do next?" "It's me, not us." King Huai shook his head and said, "You heard nothing and saw nothing today. From now on, be your general Ximen Guard and completely forget about this matter." "Completely forget?" Xiaoju looked at him, twitched the corners of his lips, and asked, "How about you teach me how to forget?" King Huai said, This is not something you can participate in. You are indeed the same as before. Xiaoju looked at him and said, however, I will avenge my sister myself, and I don't need you to tell me what to do. King Huai sighed softly and said, you are the same as before. Xiaoju waved his hand and said, let's go. King Huai looked at him and said, my plan is only one step away from being completed. I don't need you to do anything else. Xiaoju looked into his eyes and asked, what is your plan, to be the emperor? King Huai smiled and asked, do you think the Fang family and Tang Xiang will watch me do this? Xiaoju looked at King Huai's expression and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He knew very well that it seemed that His Majesty was in charge of the current affairs of the court, but if the Fang family wanted to promote King Run to the throne, the situation in the court would immediately reverse. With the energy that the Fang family currently controls, no one can go against them. Not even King Huai. Xiaoju looked at him and asked, then what do you want to do? King Huai's eyelids drooped slightly and he said, back then, he killed his brother, his father, his wife, and his children. I want him to experience these things personally. Xiaoju was silent for a moment and said, concubine Tang Hui wants to kill him, and Prince Kong and Prince Duan also want to kill him. Hasn't he already experienced the betrayal of his wife and the separation of relatives? A smile appeared on King Huai's face and he asked softly, don't you still have me? Xiaoju looked at him and was silent for a long time. Then he looked up at him again and said, that's it? You have already avenged concubine Yang and her sister's revenge. Why don't you stop here? I can't look back. King Huai smiled, looked at him, and said, but you are different. Don't let the Xiao family get into trouble again. Don't worry, I will let him live in regret for the rest of his life. The spirit in heaven used to comfort the mother, concubine, and empress. Xiaoju's face darkened and asked, have you ever thought about what to do with the princess? Have you never thought about the Xiao family? King Huai patted him on the shoulder and said, besides, it may not be the ending you imagined. I will not do anything without a way out. Without waiting for Xiaoju to speak further, he changed the subject and said, does Mr. Tang know what you want to do? Xiaoju shook his head and said, it's better not to involve him. King Huai smiled and said, you are really kind to Mr. Tang. He glanced at Xiaoju one last time and said, I'm leaving. Don't act rashly. Now is not the time to do anything. As he walked to the door, Xiaoju's voice came from behind him. You have worked hard these years. King Huai did not turn around, but waved his hand casually, remember what I just said. Xiaoju watched him leave. Lu Ya walked in from outside, glanced outside suspiciously, and asked, what did he say to you? Xiaoju said proudly, what else can I say? Of course I apologize for what happened during the day. Lu Ya said, King Huai seems so kind and will fight with you. It seems that he must care about the child's affairs. You should keep your mouth shut and don't mention this matter in front of him. Xiaoju nodded repeatedly, I know, I know. It was getting late in Prince Huai's mansion. After Prince Huai returned to the mansion, he went straight to the study. After he closed the door, the wall opposite slowly opened, and three figures walked out from behind the wall. Bai Jin pointed at a middle-aged man and introduced him, this is His Highness King Wu. King Huai cupped his hands and said, I have admired you for a long time. King Wu smiled, raised his hands and returned the greeting, I have heard about His Highness Prince Huai many times from the mouths of Elder Gongsun and Elder Bai. King Huai sat down in his seat and asked, why are you here in the capital? Aren't you afraid of being discovered by the court? Bai Jin said, the most dangerous place is the safest place. Some changes have taken place in Gizhu. Who would have thought that we would come to the capital? King Huai said, you'd better be careful. If someone discovers it, all your efforts over the years will be in vain. You don't need to remind me about this. Bai Jin looked calm and said, it's up to you to gain the emperor's trust as soon as possible. At present, he would rather choose King Run than you. You should also take action against King Run earlier. No need. King Huai waved his hand and said, the Fang family is not someone to be trifled with. If you are not careful, you will be self-defeating. Bai Jin frowned and asked, King Fuderun, do you want to attack the emperor directly? King Huai looked at her and asked, isn't it possible? Haha, Bai Jin was stunned when he heard this, while King Wu laughed and said, what a courage, Xiao admires it, admires it. King Huai's expression remained unchanged. He looked at Bai Jin again and said, where is the antidote? Bai Jin handed him a porcelain bottle and said, this is for half a year. Within this half a year, the poisonous insect will not break into the body. After half a year, when you sit on the throne, I will give you another antidote. Wasn't it 1 year before? King Kong and King Duan have both failed. Half a year is enough for you to sit on the throne. Bai Jing glanced at him and said, I hope you don't forget that this is also revenge for you. You'd better not play any tricks. After that, she added, I know you have some friendship with Tang Ning, but this poison is my own creation. No one except me knows how to remove it. If you have any crooked thoughts, it's better to put it away as soon as possible. King Huai did not answer, took the porcelain bottle, and walked out of the study without saying a word. When he reached the door of the bedroom, he stopped, took a deep breath, smiled again, and pushed the door open. Princess Huai sat on the bed, looked up at him, and asked, are those people here again? Prince Huai nodded, walked to the bed and sat down, and said, they are here to deliver the antidote. Princess Huai showed a trace of disappointment on her face, and said, Your Highness, don't agree to their excessive conditions for me. These people have no good intentions. Prince Huai stroked her hair and said, it doesn't matter. They are using me, and I am also using them. How can you get the benefit of trying to get the skin of a tiger? Princess Huai looked at him worriedly and said, they are not good people. Prince Huai took her into his arms and whispered, don't worry, I am not. His voice was very gentle, but the fierce light in his eyes was enough to make people feel cold. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 909. Nearly half a month after the regicide case of Prince Duan Hui was settled, Tang Ning only did one thing. He went to visit the officials and dignitaries he knew well in Beijing one by one. He left Beijing this time and didn't know when he would come back. Now, the Chen kingdom was gradually becoming more stable at home and abroad. Except for the western regions, there were no threats. Emperor Chen's request to him was to wait until King Run ascended the throne and he would come back to be his prime minister. Of course Tang Ning agreed wholeheartedly. If he didn't stabilize him first, he might not even be able to leave the capital. The 3-year agreement with Li Tianlan has expired. Tang Ning plans to send them to Kandy before leaving for Chu. Although it will take a lot of detours, at least he will have nothing to worry about. Anyway, he didn't want them to stay in the capital. The situation in this place was changing day by day. Someone might try to usurp the throne again, but they would still be safe in Guizhou. He went to visit General Xiao today. Inside the Xiao mansion, Xiao Ju looked at him and asked, when are you leaving? Tang Ning said, it will take some time. Xiao Ju continued to ask, are you coming back? Tang Ning shook her head and said, I don't know, maybe. Xiao Ju nodded and said, it's okay to leave. It's not interesting to stay in the capital for a long time. Tang Ning looked at Xiao Ju in surprise. Based on his understanding of this guy, he heard that he was leaving Beijing and that there was a small chance of him coming back in the future. Even if he didn't try hard to persuade him to stay, he should at least express his reluctance. Xiao Ju didn't seem to take this matter to heart, and changed the subject, since you are leaving, can you help me do a few things before leaving? When his friend was about to leave, the first thing he thought of was to ask him to do something. This was not what a human would say at all. Xiaoju, who got married and had children, is no longer the young master Xiao who valued love and righteousness. Tang Ning was a little angry and said angrily, "What's going on?" Xiaoju looked at him and asked, "General Zhou Yinkai, the guard's commander, do you still remember him?" "I have a bit of an impression." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "The one who was implicated by Prince Duan." He didn't recognize most of the generals in the 16th Guards, but he still had some impressions of General Zhou Yinkai. The regicide case of King Duan and concubine Tang Hui affected not only King Duan and the Tang family, but also all officials and dignitaries in the court who had contact with King Duan were affected to varying degrees. As for the generals of the 16th Guards, they are naturally the top priority of the investigation. Anyone who is related to the Tang family will be hunted down to the end. This Zhou Yinkai Guard general is the aide pole of the Tang family to defeat relatives, but still suffered an unreasonable disaster in that incident. Xiaoju nodded and said, "Because of King Duan's incident, he was demoted from Zhonglang general to captain. The position of Zhonglang general is now vacant. Lu Teng is qualified for this position regardless of ability or qualifications." Tang Ning finally understood what Xiaoju meant. She looked at him and asked, "Do you want Lu Teng to be the lieutenant general of the Yinkai Guard?" Xiaoju looked at him, sighed, and said, "You know, I'm just a brother-in-law, so I can't let him continue to hang out in the army." Tang Ning said in surprise, "You are the general of Ximen Guard. Isn't it very simple to transfer him to Ximen Guard? I am already a general. If I transfer Lu Teng to the rank of general, what will all the officials think? What will your majesty think?" Xiaoju glanced at him and said, "Is this your majesty's Ximen Guard, or is this a general?" "My Ximen Guard." What Xiaoju said makes sense. The imperial court has always been very taboo about the deliberate division of a single family in the Forbidden Army. The reason why King Huai transferred Ling Yun out of the Yulin Guard was because of this consideration. Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Since Lu Teng has enough qualifications, he can just leave this matter to the military department, so why do you need to do so much?" "The Ministry of War," Xiaoju shook his head and said, "It's okay to leave the Ministry of War, but doesn't it give others a chance to gossip? Even if I agree, my father-in-law will not agree." Only then did Tang Ning realize that if Lu Ding, the Minister of War, promoted his son Lu Teng to be the general of the Yinkai Guard, it would not be the case in the eyes of others. After all, Lu Teng had been with him for a while. Tang Ning nodded and said, "I'll go to Shangsha province tomorrow." Xiaoju immediately said, "Then you can help me handle a few other things by the way. In addition to Lu Teng, you can also help promote Lu Jun, Mu Yu, Huang Yulong, and others. Helping one person is also helping, and helping 3 or 4 is also helping." Tang Ning didn't care and asked, "Should we also place them in Zhou Yinkai Guard?" "This is not good." Xiaoju shook his head and said, "East Gate Guards, North Gate Guards, South Gate Guards, you arrange them separately to prevent them from forming gangs in the army and being disliked by the court." After getting married, Xiaoju's mind was obviously much better than before, and he actually took the initiative to consider this. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "I understand, I will look at the arrangements." He stood up and said, "It's getting late. I have to go and sit with Marquis Wu Lai. You tell Mr. Xiao that I'm going back." Xiaoju stood up and said, "Let's get together. I haven't seen Brother Han for a long time." Wu Lihao was now General Jinyue, responsible for the security of the 2 gates of the capital. Tang Ning sat at the Han family for half an hour before leaving alone. Xiaoju and Wu Lihao have known each other for many years. The friendship between the two is deeper, and there are still some old things to talk about. Tang Ning didn't stay with him. He still had a lot to do before leaving. The shop has been entrusted to Princess Anyang, and the thing she is most worried about is probably her father-in-law and mother-in-law. Jing Zhaoyan is the parent official of the capital, so naturally he cannot go sightseeing like them. Tang Ning's family can be explained as sightseeing, but if his father-in-law and mother-in-law go out together, I am afraid that even Emperor Chen will be suspicious and worry whether he is going to run away. In the mansion, Zhou Mingli looked at him and smiled, you can go with peace of mind. When you have arranged everything, it will not be too late for your mother-in-law and I to go there. Chen Yuxian glanced at him and said, a month ago, you said that you were tired of being Jing Zhaoyan and wanted to spend the rest of your life with me. You men are always lying. Zhou Mingli showed a trace of embarrassment on his face and said, isn't this to dispel your majesty's suspicion? Tang Ning saw the reluctance in his father-in-law's eyes, and he was not surprised by this. He had studied hard for more than 10 years just to get his name on the list of successful candidates one day. He had endured so many years in the officialdom and now he had become the Jing Zhaoyan. How could he just give up? Fortunately, the situation in the capital was no longer what it used to be. Most of the court was controlled by the Fang family. Things like the last time he was framed would not happen again. He returned to the study, and Qing'er handed him a letter. This letter was just received in the morning, but the date was a month ago. Since Tang Ning went to Guizhou, the family received a letter from the western regions every month. The content of the letter was nothing more than what they had seen and heard in the western regions. The purpose of writing this letter was just to report safety. When they went to the western regions, the elite of the beggars' gang in the capital were all out, and the 2,000 guards were well equipped, enough to wipe out most of the small and medium-sized countries in the western regions. You know, although the western regions are known as the 36 countries, most of them, including the monarchs and ministers, have only hundreds or thousands of people. They said in the letter that they would be ready to return to Beijing in a month. Tang Ning originally planned to leave for Guizhou in the near future, but judging from the time of this letter, they are already on their way back. He only needs to wait in Beijing for more than a month, and he can take them away with him. This was originally a good thing, but Tang Ning had a headache. Except for Tang Jing and his wife and Tang Zhao, who was missing, there was no one alive in the Tang family. How should he tell them about this? Tang Ning rubbed his eyebrows and was troubled by this matter. In the depths of the distant western regions, the wind and sand dissipated. Several elders of the beggar gang looked at the tens of thousands of soldiers and horses that appeared not far ahead, as well as the flags in the front, and their faces changed at the same time. Not good, it's the Zhaoan army. Even though they knew that the Zhaoan army was different from the bandits in the western regions and would not target caravans like them, everyone looked at the solemn scene in front of them and their faces gradually turned pale. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 910. Chapter 905 of the main text of Ruyi Little Man. In the defensive garden, Chen Huang was supported by Wei Jian and walked slowly in the garden. After listening to Tang Ning's words, he turned around and asked, "You want to leave the capital?" Although the fourth elder prepared the antidote for Chen Huang, his body was not as good as before, and he looked much older than half a year ago. Tang Ning nodded and said, "I have been traveling around a lot these years, and I want to take advantage of this period of stability both inside and outside to accompany my wife and family on a trip to Beijing." Chen Huang asked, "Where to go for fun?" Tang Ning said, "Let's go to Shannon West Road first. This time I went to Guizhou province and found that it has beautiful mountains and clear waters and pleasant scenery. It is a good place to enjoy." "That's fine." Emperor Chen nodded and said, "I have worked hard for you in the past few years. I have peace of mind with the king and ministers regarding matters in the court." Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty." Emperor Chen thought of something and asked again, "Shangshu Zoucheng Liqi was demoted and exiled. The position of Zoucheng is vacant. The king is old and the affairs of Shangshu province are beyond his power. Do you have any recommendations for Zhou Chang? Li Qi was originally sent to the grassland by Tang Ning. Later, King Duan was defeated. As a core figure of King Duan's party, he was recalled from his mission and has now been demoted and exiled. The position of Zhou Chang has been vacant for some time. Tang Ning shook his head and said, I can't think of anyone who can fill the vacancy of Zhou Chang. There are so many officials in the DPRK. It's not that no one is qualified for the position of Minister Zhuoken. It's that the senior officials in the DPRK are like carrots and pits. If the hole of Shangshu Zhuoken is filled, another hole will inevitably be vacated. These days the Nian Xiaotang has been reshuffled one after another. Many officials above the fourth rank are newly promoted to the position. Their foundation is not stable, so they are naturally not suitable for further action. Chen Huang seemed to have been prepared for it. Hearing this, he said, for the position of Minister Zhuoken, I have a suitable candidate in mind. Jingzhao Yingzhou Mingli has been in office for several years. He has been diligent and conscientious and has made many achievements, should be able to shoulder the responsibility of Zhou Chang. Jing Zheyin and Shangshu Zhuoken both hold official positions of the fourth rank, but the former is only a local official at best, and the place under his jurisdiction is the capital. The latter is a powerful figure in the Shangshu province, supervising 6 ministries and 24 divisions, and handling matters nationwide. The duties of the Deputy Prime Minister are exercised on all matters, large and small. This is also the reason why King Duan can firmly control the government by controlling one Li Qi. A Jing Zheyin is enough for his father-in-law to deal with. If he is put in charge of the Shangshu province, his daily affairs will definitely be busier and the impact of mistakes will be greater. Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, I believe that Jing Zheyin is not qualified enough to serve as Minister Zhuoken. Your Majesty, please think again. Huang Chen waved his hand and said, as long as you have the ability, seniority is not a problem. You are young, didn't you also sit on the position of Prime Minister in 3 years? Tang Ning didn't refute any more, instead she cupped her hands and said, it's all up to your Majesty. He knew that Emperor Chen wanted to tie his father-in-law tightly to the capital. Although he generously gave himself a long vacation, he was still preventing him from running away. Emperor Chen looked at him and said, you can go and have fun with peace of mind. Manor will take good care of you, so you don't have to worry. If promoting his father-in-law to the position of Minister Zhuoken was an indirect way for him to control Tang Ning, his last sentence was a naked threat. His purpose was to tell Tang Ning that Zhao Man, whom he liked, was still in the capital. If he left and never returned, he would never see her again. Chen Huang waved his hand and said, there's nothing going on. You can go down first. Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, I'm leaving. Wei Jian. After Tang Ning left the hall, Chen Huang suddenly spoke. Old slave is here. Wei Jian hurriedly stepped forward. Chen Huang asked, do you think he wants to leave? Wei Jian thought for a while and said, Master Tang has done a lot for the imperial court in these years. He has been sent to the Chu state, to the grassland, and to Jiangnan and Guizhou to quell the chaos. He should go out and have a good rest. Relax and relax. Huang Chen's eyes were slightly stern and he said, what I mean is that once he leaves, he doesn't plan to come back. How is this possible? Wei Jian smiled and said, Master Tang is the Prime Minister and a general. How can he be willing to leave these behind and never come back? Maybe others are reluctant, but he is willing. Chen Huang said, he is the same as Rui'er. I don't see the slightest desire for power in their eyes. I understand them. The Prime Minister, the General, and even the throne are in their eyes, they are all like worn-out shoes. He smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly and said, I, the most outstanding prince of the Chen kingdom, do not want to be the emperor, and the most capable and courageous minister. I only love the love of my children. What sins have I committed in my life? Wei Jian smiled and said, from what I see, Your Majesty is overly worried. It is precisely because Mr. Tang only loves the love between his children. As long as the princess is in the capital, he will definitely come back. Of course I know, but I still have to be wary of him. Emperor Chen looked at Wei Jian, thought for a while, and ordered, before Tang Ning leaves the capital, Manor is not allowed to leave the palace, otherwise he will be in front of me again. What kind of tricks are you using? Wei Jian nodded helplessly, bowed and said, I obey the order. Tang Ning wanted to take Zhao Man with her when she left Beijing this time, but Huang Chen was obviously wary of him. It was not easy to take her away quietly. When he came out of the palace, he did not go back to the other courtyard, but to the palace in Jingnei, next door to the princess's palace. He waited for half an hour in the mansion, but Zhao Man didn't show up. Tang Ning's face showed a strange color. He and Zhao Man had agreed to meet at the princess mansion at noon today. She always arrived early and had never been late for so long. Tang Ning waited for a full hour and finally concluded that something must have happened in the palace. He walked out of the Tang mansion and headed for Princess Anyang's mansion. He could enter the palace, but he didn't have a suitable reason to see Zhao Man. A long time ago, Princess Anyang became the mouthpiece between the two of them. In the princess's mansion, Princess Anyang looked at him with her arms around her chest and asked, "Why are you here? Do you feel guilty and want to give me another 10% of the profit?" Tang Ning said, "It's not impossible to discuss this, but now I have an important thing to ask the princess." Although Princess Anyang was sometimes inexplicable, she was very reliable. After listening to Tang Ning's explanation of his intention, she immediately went to the palace to help him find out the situation. This made Tang Ning feel a little embarrassed, so he decided to wait for her to come back and give her another 10% of the store's profit. Tang Ning was waiting in the room alone. A maid was looking out the door. When Tang Ning looked over, she ran away in a panic. The maid was Princess Anyang's personal maid, Pinner. It was not the first time Tang Ning had seen her, so he did not pay much attention. He stayed in the room for a while, and then heard footsteps outside the door again. Anyang. Prince Fu walked in from outside the door. When he saw Tang Ning, he was stunned for a moment, and his pace suddenly quickened. He asked, "Why are you here? Where is Anyang?" "Hello, Your Majesty." Tang Ning bowed to him and said, "The princess has something to do in the palace. I'm waiting for her here." The look in Prince Fu's eyes when he looked at him was still suspicious. Although his daughter had many friends, including many young talents, she had never invited any man into her boudoir, let alone repeatedly. He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "What does Prime Minister Tang want to see Anyang about?" Of course, he couldn't tell Prince Fu about his relationship with Zhao Man. Tang Ning smiled and said, "Some business matters." "What business matters?" Prince Fu sat down opposite him, intending to get to the bottom of it. Luan mobile website. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 911. The text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. Chapter 906. House arrest. Tang Ning and Prince Fu had no friendship, and they had not even spoken to each other for a few words. It was reasonable that Prince Fu should not be so familiar with him. However, after all, this matter was related to his daughter. Tang Ning could understand Prince Fu's caution and explained, "The Tang family's shop in the capital is managed by Princess Anyang. I came here today to discuss profit sharing with her." Prince Fu took a sip of tea and asked, "I heard from Anyang that you have already given her 20% of the profit." Tang Ning said, 20% of the profit is not enough to comfort the princess for her hard work, so I plan to give her another 10%. Prince Fu looked at him with a sharp look in his eyes. While Tang Ning was drinking tea, he suddenly asked, "Lord Tang, tell me honestly, are you interested in Anyang?" Ahem. Tang Ning was choked by the tea and almost spit out a mouthful of tea. He wiped the corner of his mouth with his sleeve, looking a little embarrassed. He put down the teacup, looked at Prince Fu, and asked, "Why do you think so?" "Lord Tang is a smart man, so I won't beat around the bush when I speak." Prince Fu looked at him and said, "You send tens of millions of taels of silver to Anyang every year for no reason. Is it because the Tang family has too much money to burn?" Tang Ning shook his head and said, "To be honest, this is because I am often away from the capital, and I have to find a backer for the shops in the capital to avoid being bullied by others." Prince Fu sneered, "Who in the capital doesn't know the reputation of Prime Minister Tang? Who is so bold as to touch your Tang family's shop?" Tang Ning glanced at Prince Fu. He couldn't tell Prince Fu that he was going to run away this time and never come back, so he had no choice but to entrust Princess Anyang to him. He just shook his head calmly and said, "Whether the prince believes it or not, I don't have any improper thoughts about the princess." Prince Fu suddenly showed a kind smile on his face and said, "I don't blame Tang Xiang. Anyang has a gentle personality and is beautiful. There are many young talents in the capital who admire Tang Xiang, but there are very few who are worthy of her. There are even fewer people like Tang Xiang who are talented and have status." Tang Ning looked at Prince Fu again, and always felt that there was something else behind his words. Prince Fu's smile widened, and he said to himself, "Prince Tang may not know that although Anyang has many friends, including many young talents, you are the only one who can enter her boudoir, which shows that your position in her heart is different from others." What Prince Fu said was nonsense. Can others give his daughter millions of taels of silver as pocket money every year like himself? Not to mention entering her boudoir, it would not be too much to be worshipped as a god of wealth by her. Tang Ning looked at Prince Fu and asked, "Your Majesty, you might as well say it directly." Prince Fu looked at him and said, "In this case, I will say it directly." He put down the teacup, looked at Tang Ning, and said, "I want you and Anyang." Tang Ning asked, "Become sworn brothers and sisters?" At this moment, Prince Fu reminded Tang Ning of Prince Xian and Mr. Tang. Prince Fu looked at Tang Ning and said happily, "You also have this idea?" Tang Ning looked at Prince Fu and said seriously, "To be honest, Your Majesty, there were two people who wanted me to become siblings with their daughters." "Then what?" Prince Fu asked, "You got two more sisters?" Tang Ning smiled and said, "Later, their daughters became my wives." "What?" Prince Fu slammed the table and was furious. Tang Ning looked at him and shook his head and said, "Your Majesty, don't worry. The princess and I have a pure relationship between men and women. After today, I will not come here to find her." Prince Fu's face was gloomy, and he didn't say anything. I don't know what he was thinking. "I'm back." Princess Anyang walked in from outside. When she saw Prince Fu, she was stunned and asked, "Father, why are you here?" Prince Fu glanced at her and asked in a deep voice, "This is my home. Where else would I be if I'm not here?" Zhao Man's affairs could not be told in front of Prince Fu. Princess Anyang looked at him, blinked, and said, "Then can father go out for a while? I have something to say to Prime Minister Tang." Prince Fu stood up suddenly, snorted coldly, and strode out of the room. Princess Anyang looked at Tang Ning and asked, "What did you say to my father?" He seemed very angry. Tang Ning said, "Prince Fu asked me to become your brother and sister." Princess Anyang was stunned and asked, "Then what?" Tang Ning said, "I refused." Princess Anyang snorted coldly and said, "I don't agree to have a brother as bold as you. Let's not talk about this." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "How is manner?" Speaking of this, Princess Anyang's face showed a trace of seriousness, and said, "Palace, something happened in the palace. Manor is under house arrest for a month. She cannot leave the palace during this month. You can only see her after a month." "1 month," Tang Ning said calmly. "After a month, she will probably be under house arrest for another month." Princess Anyang looked at him and said in shock, "You mean, the emperor did it on purpose? He knows that you and Manor..." Tang Ning nodded and said, he knew it a long time ago. Princess Anyang trembled. It was not until this moment that she realized how much the emperor's indulgence and favor towards Tang Ning had reached. After coming to her senses, she looked at Tang Ning again and asked, what are you going to do? Tang Ning looked at her and said, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you again these days. It's not a big deal. Princess Anyang waved her hand and said, anyway, I'm already on your pirate ship. I don't have any other requests. I just ask you to be nicer to Manor in the future. She lost her mother when she was young, and His Majesty treats her. In short, if you dare to bully Manor, I won't let you go even if you run to the ends of the earth. Tang Ning looked directly at Princess Anyang and said from the bottom of her heart, thank you. Princess Anyang rolled her eyes and said, if you really want to thank me, add another 10% of the profit. Add another 30%. Tang Ning smiled and said, from now on, we will split the profits of the Tang family store in the capital equally. Great. Princess Anyang jumped up from where she was when she heard this and gave Tang Ning a big kiss on the face. While Tang Ning was stunned, Princess Anyang also realized that the people in front of him were not his father and mother. She seemed to be a little proud and forgetful just now. You have a conscience. I didn't misjudge you. She forced herself to be calm and walked out of the room as if nothing had happened. After stepping out of the room, her steps suddenly accelerated and she disappeared into the courtyard in an instant. Tang Ning came back to her senses, wiped the lipstick on her face, glanced at the direction where Princess Anyang left, shook her head gently, and walked out. In the garden of the palace, Princess Anyang's face was red, and her heart was beating non-stop. When she faced Tang Ning just now, she pretended to be very calm, but now she covered her chest and her face was flushed. Apart from her father, this was the first time he kissed a person of the opposite sex. She thought that after she reacted, she would feel disgusted, but at this moment, she could only feel shyness and nervousness. Pinner walked into the garden and asked in surprise, Princess, what's wrong with you? Princess Anyang looked at her and asked, Pinner, have you ever kissed a man? Pinner blushed and whispered, no, no. Princess Anyang didn't think about getting an answer from her, and murmured, what would it feel like? Pinner thought for a while and said, there are so many young men who like the princess, such as Mr. Zhang and Mr. Li. The princess will find out if she tries with them. For some reason, Princess Anyang, who was curious and expectant about this matter just now, suddenly felt disgusted in her heart, glared at Pinner, and said angrily, if you keep talking nonsense, watch your butt. However, as soon as she finished speaking, her expression froze again, she stretched out her index finger, touched her lips, and a trace of disbelief appeared on her face.